The people, the headlines, the issues impacting you and your family. This Week in Cincinnati on 9 on Your Side.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Cincinnati. I'm Tanya O'Rourke. We begin our program this year with the city at the heart of our region, of course, Cincinnati. As diverse as our area is, with 3 states, an economy that ranges from farming to big data marketing, state of Cincinnati determines much of this region's success. And with that in mind, we can't think of a better person to speak with than the mayor of Cincinnati, John Cranley. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Tanya.
And also with us, WCPO government reporter Paula Christian. And by the way, this is the 3rd year. We should thank you, Mayor Cranley, the 3rd year that you've joined us for our first program of the year on This Week in Cincinnati. So we'll just keep this going.
That sounds great.
Does that sound okay?
Yes.
And actually, so we taped this on Friday, and this morning, so this being Friday morning, you held a news conference to talk about something that's a really disturbing situation that's happened recently in the Cincinnati Police Department. That is 2 officers caught on camera, so certainly this has probably happened other times, using the N-word, something that most people everyone should find despicable. And so they will get suspension without pay for essentially a week. Is that enough?
Well, let me step back a bigger picture. It's also the case that today it came out that we had the best year in reduced shootings in 10 years. And so our police are doing great work all the time. But this word is unacceptable. And when I was a member of council years ago, the city fired a cop for using the N-word, among other things, and then he sued and got reinstated. So it doesn't really serve us well to do something that if we end up having to pay out on a big lawsuit. What the city manager did do in October prior to these recent incidences was make the policy as strict as possible, which is if you do it once, you get repositioned, retrained, and you lose 40 hours of pay, a whole week of work. Second time, you will be fired. We believe that's the strictest policy that we can hold up in court. It's totally unacceptable. Of course, intent and context matters, but I've watched the tape of these 2 incidences, and there's no excuse for what they did.
And it doesn't matter. Black, white, doesn't matter who says it. That's just going to be an across-the-board situation.
Yeah, I mean, we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard, and I think people expect government to be at a higher standard. It's certainly the case that our officers have it used against them on a regular basis, and that's unfortunate and wrong also. But we do hold ourselves to a professionalism that is a moral standard that we expect to model for others. So it's also the case that I called today for mandatory implicit and explicit bias training for officers on a going forward basis. And I want to make this point about implicit bias that I think is important, because sometimes if it's all about race, people tend to maybe miss the forest for the trees at times. The most obvious case of implicit bias recently that was glaring and had real life consequences was the case of Kyle Plush, because the 911 dispatcher said that it was an old woman that may have been locked in or out of her car. So the officers were looking for an old woman, not for a young boy. Now, the dispatcher didn't do it intentionally. She probably did think she was hearing an old woman's voice. But that's an implicit bias that you think you know what an old woman's voice sounds like. And that can really hurt people. And so this idea of training around bias is a real issue. And not because we're trying to accuse people of being insensitive or prejudiced, but because we all have biases and we need to train ourselves to keep an open mind.
While we're on, you talked about Kyle Plush. Let me ask this real quickly, that tragedy, the city's still grappling with that in so many ways. The Plush family is still not satisfied with the progress and improvement of the 911 system. So where would you like to see the 911 system in 6 months?
Well, most importantly is to have more operators and dispatchers in place and hired. What we discovered was that there has been a really difficult time recruiting 911 dispatchers, training them and getting them hired. We've raised the pay to get better qualified people and more interested people, but we've also had to speed up the background checks and others to get people hired, because people can't wait 6 months to get a job, especially in a good job market. And so the manager, in my opinion, has showed real leadership, making a number of personnel decisions, some of which were not popular, but were about getting better results.
Okay, Paula.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about economic development.
Yes.
You and quite a few leaders in Cincinnati went to China recently. Can you tell us about the trip and what you hope will result to our city?
Yeah, I mean, at a big picture, I'd never been to China before. At a big picture level, I want us to win. You know, they are rising economic power, dramatically so. And I want USA to win. I want Cincinnati to win. So it was interesting to learn what they've done, and I think their investment in artificial intelligence, technology, infrastructure, roads and bridges is really impressive. And I think we should do more of that. But it's also the case that they have millionaires and billionaires who are now looking to export investment and jobs overseas. And so I'd like to have some of those people invest here and bring jobs and opportunity to Cincinnati. One of the great things about the United States is, a book I read when I went over there by a Harvard professor named Graham Allison, he points out that one of our great strategic advantages as Americans is that half of the wealthiest companies that were founded in the United States were founded by immigrants. Half. That's not true of any other nation in the world. Mm-hmm. And so what I want to do is convince Chinese entrepreneurs, engineers, scientists to come here and become Americans.
Would they realistically be interested in Cincinnati?
Yes. Well, they're interested in the United States for a couple reasons. One is, as they make money, they want to pass it to their kids, and they live in a communist state that could take their money away from them. So a lot of Chinese want the American dream to come here to be able to pass their wealth to their kids and to their family. And that's where they think like Americans, those who have been successful financially, and then they can bring jobs and investment here. But specifically, the trip was organized by Procter & Gamble and Reddy and UC, but Procter & Gamble's been located there for 30 years, so they have a lot of relationships. And in fact, one of the men that we met, a lawyer, came at his own expense to Cincinnati yesterday to follow up on our meeting in China, and his goal is to try to convince businesses to be located in Cincinnati.
That's fantastic. Okay, there's so much more to talk about, so we will continue our conversation with Mayor John Cranley in just a moment. Stay with us.
The people, the headlines, the issues impacting you, all on This Week in Cincinnati on 9 on Your Side.